The secret witness disappeared. Chapter 1. It was a bleak November morning when I found Sherlock Holmes seated at our usual breakfast table, his long fingers interlaced, his sharp eyes fixed upon an article in the Times. The crisp pages rustled faintly as he turned them with meticulous care. A faint smirk played upon his lips, an expression I knew well, for it signalled the onset of a most peculiar case. I set down my teacup. "Something of interest, Holmes?" Without a word, he passed the newspaper across to me, tapping a particular paragraph with the end of his forefinger. The body of Mr. Oswald Willoughby, the esteemed barrister known for his work in the Crown's most sensitive cases, was discovered late last night at his residence in Kensington. The circumstances of his death remain a baffling enigma. Found in his locked study, Mr. Willoughby had succumbed to an apparent heart failure. Yet a single phrase was found scrawled upon his desk in his own hand. "The witness is gone." Strangely, the sole person due to testify in his latest case, a man known only as J. Harrington, has vanished without a trace. Scotland Yard is investigating, but has yet to determine whether foul play was involved. Superintendent Gregson has issued a statement urging the public to come forward with any information. No signs of forced entry or disturbance have been reported in the victim's home. I looked up, meeting Holmes's expectant gaze. "A tragic affair," I mused, "yet the matter seems rather straightforward. His heart gave out, and his last thoughts were of the case he was working on." Holmes gave a slow, measured shake of his head. "Come now, Watson, you surprise me. Consider the facts. An influential barrister dies under seemingly natural circumstances, yet he writes a cryptic message upon his desk before his demise, and a crucial witness, whose testimony could alter the course of a legal battle, vanishes in the same breath." He steepled his fingers. "No, my dear fellow, there is something unnatural at play." I frowned, glancing at the article once more. Superintendent Gregson seems to believe it was mere coincidence. Holmes let out a dry chuckle. "Gregson believes what is most convenient. But let us apply reason. First, a man does not scrawl an ominous warning moments before dying unless he is aware of some present danger. Secondly, his home was locked, undisturbed, no sign of a struggle. And finally, the witness in question has ceased to exist. Not fled, Watson, vanished." "A planned disappearance?" Holmes leaned forward. "Planned or forced? That is the question." He tapped the paper once more. "We shall not find our answers here. Gregson is a diligent man, but he lacks imagination. The facts have been presented to him, and yet he sees only the simplest solution. That, Watson, is why we must intervene." A knock at the door interrupted our discussion. Mrs. Hudson's familiar voice announced a visitor. "A Mr. Lucian Darnley to see you, Mr. Holmes. Says it's urgent." Holmes shot me a knowing glance, and so the game begins. Chapter 2. It was not long before we found ourselves outside the imposing facade of Blackwood Manor, the decaying estate that loomed over the Thames like a relic of a forgotten past. The evening fog curled around its iron gates, muting the distant hum of the city beyond. A single gas lamp flickered outside, its dim glow barely illuminating the stone gargoyles perched above the entrance, their hollow eyes watching like sentinels of a darker age. Holmes had been uncharacteristically quiet during our journey. Seated opposite me in the carriage, He drummed his long fingers against the wooden seat, his gaze distant yet precise, as if he were assembling an invisible puzzle in his mind. "You have deduced something already, Holmes," I said at last. "Something of significance." Holmes did not look at me, but merely adjusted his gloves. "There are always pieces, Watson. Whether they fit together as I suspect, that remains to be seen." Before I could press him further, the carriage came to a stop. Holmes stepped out with practised ease, his sharp eyes scanning the manor's exterior. I followed, my gaze lingering on the weathered stone arch above the door, where an unfamiliar inscription had been carved in ancient Latin. "Obscuritas veritatem celat." Darkness conceals the truth. A fitting motto for a house such as this. Holmes's keen gaze flickered to me as he gestured to the entrance. "Shall we?" The heavy oak doors creaked as they opened, revealing a grand but desolate interior. A lone servant, an aging butler with a face as lined as parchment, led us through the dimly lit corridors. The air was thick with dust and something else I could not quite place, an odour that clung to the walls like a lingering whisper of the past. At last we were ushered into a cavernous study lined with towering bookshelves. A fireplace crackled in the corner, casting restless shadows against the mahogany walls. Near the centre of the room, seated in a leather chair, was Lord Edwin Blackwood, the last heir of his once powerful lineage. His presence was striking, a gaunt figure draped in an emerald robe, his pale fingers wrapped around a crystal glass of brandy. His features were sharp, his greying hair slicked back, and his expression unreadable. But it was his eyes that unsettled me most, piercing, almost predatory, as if he saw far more than he wished to reveal. Holmes took no time for pleasantries. "You wrote to me, Lord Blackwood. You mentioned something urgent, something connected to the case of Charles Weatherby and the mark of the Serpent." Lord Blackwood exhaled slowly, setting his glass aside. "I had hoped you would come, Mr. Holmes. I fear I may not have much time." There was something deliberate in his phrasing, and I did not miss the way his fingers tightened around the arm of his chair. Holmes remained impassive. "Then let us not waste it. Speak plainly." Lord Blackwood's gaze shifted to me before returning to Holmes. "The Serpent is real." A silence stretched between us. Holmes, however, showed no sign of surprise. "I do not deal in superstition, Lord Blackwood." "This is no superstition," the man countered. "It is a secret that men have killed to protect." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The mark of the Serpent is not merely a symbol. It is an invocation, a calling card of something far older than our laws, something that operates in the dark corners of London where the police dare not tread." The fireplace crackled, filling the silence that followed. For the first time, Holmes's expression shifted, not to shock, but to something even more dangerous. "Interest. And you believe you are next," he said. Lord Blackwood exhaled sharply, running a hand through his greying hair. "There have been warnings. A figure in the street watching my home. A letter with no name, bearing only the mark." He gestured to the desk, where a folded envelope rested atop a stack of books. Holmes moved with swift precision, retrieving the letter and turning it over in his fingers. The wax seal was unmistakable, a coiled serpent, its fangs bared in silent threat. He broke the seal and unfolded the parchment, scanning the message in a glance. Then, to my surprise, he handed it to me. "You have seen too much. The past does not forget." I felt a chill creep up my spine. "What does it mean?" Holmes's gaze lingered on Lord Blackwood. "It means, Watson, that our host has not been entirely honest with us." Blackwood's face darkened. "I have told you all I know." Holmes tilted his head slightly. "Then tell me, Lord Blackwood, why is there no dust upon the books on your top shelf, while the rest of your study has not been touched in months?" The colour drained from Blackwood's face. I turned my gaze to the shelves, my eyes narrowing. Holmes was right. The books on the topmost row were too clean, their bindings pristine amidst the surrounding neglect. Holmes stepped forward, extending his arm and plucking a single volume from the row. Then, with a soft click, the entire shelf shifted. A hidden door, a hidden truth. Holmes turned back to Blackwood, his voice dangerously soft. "Would you care to explain why you have a secret passage in your study, my lord?" Chapter 3. A tense silence settled upon the study as Lord Blackwood stared at the displaced bookshelf. His hand tightened around the armrest of his chair, his knuckles pale against his skin. Holmes, however, did not share in his apprehension. With measured precision, he pressed his palm against the now exposed wooden panel, testing its resistance. The faintest creak whispered through the chamber as the passage slid open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit corridor beyond. I exchanged a wary glance with Holmes. It seems our host has been concealing more than he admitted. Holmes did not respond. His eyes gleamed with the kind of excitement that only a fresh discovery could provide. He stepped forward, his fingers tracing the dustless edge of the doorway. "You will forgive me, Lord Blackwood," he murmured, "but I must insist upon an explanation." The nobleman hesitated for the briefest moment before exhaling sharply. "I have never ventured beyond that passage," he admitted. "It was sealed when I inherited the estate, and I saw no reason to disturb what was long forgotten." Holmes arched a sceptical brow. "And yet, someone has disturbed it. Recently." He gestured towards the pristine shelf. "Dust does not settle selectively, Lord Blackwood." I felt the air in the room shift, a quiet yet palpable tension. Blackwood's expression wavered, as though he were balancing between confession and denial. Holmes did not wait for an answer. Without another word, he stepped into the passage, disappearing into the darkness. "Holmes!" I called after him, but he had already vanished. I turned back to Blackwood. His face was unreadable, but I detected something beneath his hardened gaze. Fear, or perhaps something worse. I followed Holmes into the passage. The air grew stale as we descended a narrow spiral staircase. A faint, almost imperceptible hum filled the space, like the whisper of wind through unseen cracks. My footsteps echoed against the stone floor, the sound swallowed by the oppressive weight of the darkness around us. Holmes moved with careful confidence, his fingers skimming the walls as though mapping an unseen trail. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Do you feel it, Watson?" I frowned. "Feel what?" He halted, tilting his head slightly. "The air here, it shifts unnaturally. A space beyond this wall." He pressed his hand against the cold stone. applying pressure to its surface. With a soft click, a hidden latch released. The wall swung inward, revealing a hidden chamber. The room was small, barely large enough to contain the modest wooden table and the single chair at its centre. But it was not the furnishings that drew my attention. It was the stench of decay. My stomach twisted as my eyes adjusted to the dim glow of a flickering oil lamp in the corner. A figure slumped over the table motionless, his face obscured by shadows. Holmes stepped forward, his movements deliberate. He reached out, tilting the figure's head toward the light. Even in death, the man's face was frozen in an expression of sheer terror. I recoiled instinctively. Good heavens! Holmes's voice was eerily calm. J. Harrington, I presume. It was the missing witness, or rather, what remained of him. A thick rope of black ink had been smeared across his throat, its pattern unmistakable. A serpent, its coils twisting into an intricate sigil. The mark. Holmes crouched beside the body, his keen eyes darting over every detail. He touched the man's wrist, lifting his arm ever so slightly before letting it drop. The stiff movement confirmed what I already suspected. He's been dead for at least a day, I murmured. Holmes nodded, but his attention had shifted elsewhere. His fingers trailed over the parchment strewn across the table. I stepped closer, my gaze settling upon a single phrase scrawled in frantic, uneven script. "They are watching." A chill crept down my spine. "Holmes!" He held up a hand. "Quiet, Watson!" I froze. Holmes's head turned sharply toward the entrance. His gaze darkened, his body suddenly taut. Then I heard it, a faint shuffle, a breath. We were not alone. Chapter 4a. Sound, faint, deliberate. Holmes and I were not alone in the hidden chamber. The oppressive silence that had loomed over the room now carried a weight of expectation. Somewhere beyond the dim glow of the flickering oil lamp, someone was watching. Holmes remained utterly still, his sharp gaze darting toward the threshold we had crossed moments ago. My own breath felt unnaturally loud in the stifling air, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then another movement, a step. Holmes acted first. In a swift, fluid motion, he extinguished the lamp, plunging us into absolute darkness. "Stay close, Watson," he whispered. His voice was composed, but I detected the slightest edge to it, anticipation. I did as he instructed, straining to listen. The footsteps had halted, as though our unseen observer had hesitated upon realizing their advantage had been lost. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then a rustle of fabric, a sharp intake of breath. Holmes moved. There was a sudden scuffle, a gasp, the unmistakable sound of a body colliding with the stone floor. I reached instinctively for my revolver, but before I could act, Holmes had already secured the situation. "Watson!" he called, his voice measured. "Light the lamp again." I fumbled with the matches, striking one against the cold stone. The flame flared to life, casting erratic shadows against the damp walls. Holmes stood above a man, his knee pressed firmly against the figure's chest, one hand gripping his wrist, while the other held a gleaming knife that must have been wrenched from our assailant's grasp. The stranger's face was half obscured by a dark scarf, but his wide, frantic eyes glared up at Holmes in pure defiance. "Who sent you?" Holmes inquired, his voice calm but edged with steel. The man gave no answer. His lips remained pressed into a tight line, his body rigid beneath Holmes's grip. Holmes studied him for a long moment, then leaned in slightly, his tone shifting to something almost amused. "Ah, you are afraid." The man's jaw tensed, but still he did not speak. Holmes exhaled lightly, as though only mildly inconvenienced. "The mark upon Harrington's throat suggests ritual, but your presence here is that of a man sent to observe, not perform. Your clothes, tailored, though modest. Your hands, calloused, yet not from labour. A man accustomed to secrecy, perhaps, but not violence." Holmes tightened his hold slightly, enough to make the man wince. "You are no murderer. You are a messenger." For the first time the man reacted. His eyes flickered. Fear, confirmation, denial, all in an instant. Holmes saw it. He smiled faintly. "I believe, Watson, we have just captured the most important piece of this puzzle." The man, still bound, sat rigid in the chair where Holmes had positioned him. Lord Blackwood had appeared in the doorway moments after the struggle, his face stricken with horror at the scene in his hidden chamber. He had said nothing, merely stepping aside as Holmes and I dragged the man up the stone steps back into the manor. Now, in the dim candlelight of Blackwood's study, Holmes observed the captive with a mixture of curiosity and satisfaction. "You are going to tell me everything," he said simply. The man scoffed, his voice hoarse but steady. "You know nothing of the Serpent." Holmes's smile did not waver. "No? Then allow me to offer my hypothesis." He stepped forward, placing a single finger against the polished surface of Blackwood's desk. "The mark of the Serpent is not merely a symbol, it is a message, a warning to those who seek to uncover its secrets. It operates in the shadows, influencing affairs in ways the law cannot touch. Those who speak of it often find themselves—" Holmes gestured toward the dead man we had found below. Silenced, the captive did not respond, but I noticed the slight twitch of his fingers, a subconscious reaction. Holmes nodded slightly. "And yet you were not here to kill us, were you?" Silence. Holmes continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You were sent to watch, to listen, perhaps even to delay us." A flicker of hesitation. Then the faintest exhale. The man knew he had been unravelled. Holmes seized the moment. He crouched slightly, meeting the man's level, and spoke the next words with deliberate weight. "You are not the only one in this room working for them." Blackwood, who had been standing silently by the fireplace, stiffened. The captive's expression did not change, but his eyes, they shifted, not toward Holmes, not toward me, toward Blackwood. A charged silence filled the study. I turned to Blackwood, who had stepped backward, his hands tightening at his sides. His face was pale, but his voice, when he spoke, remained carefully measured. "You are mistaken, Holmes." Holmes did not move, but his eyes gleamed with something far sharper than amusement now. Am I? For the first time since our arrival at Blackwood Manor, I saw it. Not fear, not grief, guilt. Holmes took a slow step forward. You knew about the passage. You knew about the body. And yet you insisted you had never set foot beyond that door. Blackwood's jaw clenched. I told you, I inherited the house. The passage was sealed before my time. Holmes tilted his head. Yes, but the letters, Lord Blackwood, they were written in fresh ink. The nobleman said nothing. Holmes continued, his voice now soft, lethal. You knew J. Harrington was dead before we found him. Silence. Blackwood's breath grew shallow. I saw his hands tremble ever so slightly. Holmes exhaled lightly, turning back to our captive. You may go, he said simply. The man's head snapped up in disbelief. Blackwood froze. You... what? I stammered. Holmes smiled. He has served his purpose. The captive did not hesitate. With an almost primal urgency, he shot up from his seat and bolted toward the door. Blackwood's mouth opened, to call out, to stop him. But no words came. The door slammed. The silence that followed was deafening. Holmes turned back to Blackwood, his expression unreadable. The mark of the serpent does not kill its own, does it? A moment passed. Then Blackwood ran, but Holmes was faster. With a single step, he reached out, grabbing Blackwood's wrist with an iron grip. The nobleman flailed, but it was no use. Holmes wrenched him back, his voice cold. No more lies! Watched as Blackwood's face contorted, not in anger, but resignation. And then, at last, he spoke the words that changed everything. I had no choice. Chapter 5. Lord Blackwood sagged in Holmes's grip, the fight draining from his frame as the weight of the moment settled upon him. His breath came in shallow, uneven gasps, his eyes darting between Holmes and myself like a cornered animal assessing its final, futile avenues of escape. I had no choice, he repeated, though the words rang hollow in the oppressive silence of the study. Holmes, ever unshaken, released his hold, allowing Blackwood to collapse into the chair he had so recently occupied. He regarded him with the same detached curiosity he might afford a rare insect pinned beneath glass. There is always a choice, Lord Blackwood, Holmes murmured. It is merely a matter of what one values more, self-preservation or truth. Blackwood's lips pressed into a thin line. You don't understand. Then enlighten me, Holmes said simply. For a moment, it seemed Blackwood might resist further, but then he exhaled sharply, his shoulders sinking. His voice, when he spoke, was laced with something between resignation and fear. The serpent, he whispered, is older than you can imagine. I stiffened at the name. Drumstieg remained unmoved, his sharp eyes fixed upon the nobleman. It is not merely a society, Blackwood continued. It is a legacy, one that predates this house, predates the very streets of London itself. A council of men who have shaped history from the shadows, whose influence extends beyond the reach of law or monarchy. Holmes tilted his head ever so slightly. And you are one of them. Blackwood's throat bobbed as he swallowed. By birthright, not by choice. Holmes hummed in quiet contemplation. And yet J. Harrington was murdered under your roof. You expect me to believe you were merely an unwilling participant. Blackwood flinched. I didn't know. He stopped himself, shaking his head. No, That is a lie. I suspected, but suspicion is not knowledge. Holmes folded his arms. That, my dear Blackwood, is a distinction only a guilty man would make. The nobleman shut his eyes, as though the weight of Holmes's words physically pained him. "You do not know what you are dealing with," he said at last. "The serpent does not abide betrayal." Holmes regarded him with quiet amusement. "Then I must consider myself fortunate, as I have no intention of betraying them. Exposing them, however, that is another matter entirely." Blackwood's eyes snapped open. "You think you have unravelled this mystery, Holmes, but you do not see the full picture. The man who watched us in the passage, he was nothing but a pawn. Even I—" His voice broke, his hands curling into fists. "I am but a piece in this game." Holmes studied him for a moment before speaking, his voice softer than I expected. "Then tell me, Blackwood, who holds the board?" The nobleman hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the hearth as though he feared speaking the name aloud. Then, finally, he did. "Victor Radcliffe." The name sent a ripple through the air, though I could not say why. I had never heard it before. But Holmes had a strange gleam flickered in his eyes. His fingers twitched slightly at his sides, as though resisting the urge to curl into fists. "Radcliffe," he murmured. "So he has returned," I started. "You know this man?" Holmes let out a humorless chuckle. "Know him, Watson. I have hunted him." I turned to Blackwood. "Who is he?" Blackwood's face was pale. "The true leader of the Serpent," he said hoarsely. "The architect of every move they have made for the last decade." Holmes exhaled, his expression unreadable. "And he has orchestrated this entire affair." Blackwood nodded. Harrington was a threat to their operation. He had uncovered something he was not meant to see. They silenced him before he could speak. Holmes's gaze darkened, and yet he did speak. He left us a message. I recalled the words scrawled upon the table in the hidden chamber. "They are watching." Holmes turned back to Blackwood, his voice deceptively mild. "And where might we find Mr. Radcliffe?" Blackwood swallowed. "If I tell you, I am a dead man." Holmes smiled. "Then it is fortunate that I am quite adept at ensuring men remain alive." A beat of silence, then at last Blackwood spoke. Chapter 6. Lord Blackwood hesitated, the weight of his next words settling upon him like a leaden shroud. His eyes flickered toward the firelight, as though he sought refuge in its flickering glow. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, nearly swallowed by the oppressive silence that had filled the study. "Radcliffe does not exist in the manor. You believe, Holmes?" His fingers drummed lightly against the arm of his chair. "He is a name without a face, a ghost that drifts between London's shadows, present in whispers, absent in flesh. Even among the Serpent, only a select few have met him." Holmes remained still, his sharp features unreadable. "And yet you have," he murmured. Blackwood exhaled. Slowly, once, long ago, before I understood what it meant to stand before a man like that. I studied Blackwood's face in the dim candlelight. There was a hollowness behind his eyes now, a look I had seen before in men who had returned from war, men who had witnessed something beyond reckoning. Holmes, however, remained unmoved. "And where does a ghost like Radcliffe conduct his affairs?" Blackwood hesitated. Then, with visible reluctance, he spoke. "The Hollow Cathedral." The name sent an involuntary shiver through me. It conjured visions of something ancient, forgotten. A place where things unspoken were buried beneath centuries of silence. Holmes, however, merely nodded. "A most fitting sanctuary for a man who does not wish to be found." I frowned. "Surely, Holmes, even you do not suggest that we walk blindly into such a place. If Radcliffe is truly as untouchable as Blackwood claims, then he will not welcome uninvited guests." Holmes's expression did not waver. "On the contrary, Watson, he has spent years avoiding me. It is high time he and I were reacquainted." The wind howled through the narrow alleyways as Holmes and I approached the ruined structure that loomed before us. The hollow cathedral had long since been abandoned to decay, its towering stone arches blackened with soot and time. Though once a place of worship, it now stood as a husk, its grandeur warped into something darker, more secretive. As we stepped onto the frozen steps, I caught sight of movement in the periphery. A shifting shadow, there and gone in an instant. "We are being watched," I murmured. Holmes did not look up, but his hand slid casually into his coat pocket. "As expected," he said lightly. "Radcliffe would never make it so simple. But he will grant us passage. He must be as eager to see me as I am to see him." I swallowed my misgivings and followed Holmes through the towering doors. Inside, the cathedral was shrouded in darkness, save for the distant glow of candlelight at the far end of the nave. Rows of rotting pews lined the stone floor, and above us the skeletal remains of a once magnificent ceiling stretched into shadows, its stained glass windows shattered long ago. A figure stood waiting. At first he appeared almost as an extension of the darkness itself, a tall, slender man clad in black, his hands clasped neatly before him. His face, when it caught the candlelight, was unnervingly smooth, his expression one of careful, practised composure. But it was his eyes that unsettled me most. "Cold, calculating, and knowing, Holmes," the man murmured, his voice smooth, deliberate. "I had begun to wonder when you would finally find your way here." Holmes stopped several paces away, regarding the man with that same unshaken gaze. "I do apologize, Radcliffe," he said. "It appears I have been rather occupied." Radcliffe smiled, but there was no warmth to it. "Indeed. And yet even you must have realized this has never been about Wetherby, nor Blackwood, nor even your precious Scotland Yard." He took a slow step forward. "This has always been about you." Holmes remained still, but I saw the shift in his demeanour. Not surprise, but confirmation. "You never intended to conceal this affair," Holmes said softly. "On the contrary, you wanted me to follow the trail." Radcliffe inclined his head slightly, as though granting Holmes the satisfaction of truth. "I had my doubts," Radcliffe admitted, "but it is most delightful to see that you are still as precise as ever." A slow realization settled over me like frost. "Holmes," I murmured, "this was a test." Holmes did not look at me, but I saw the faint flicker in his gaze. Radcliffe's smirk deepened. "Oh, Dr. Watson, you do not yet understand. Your dear friend," his eyes flickered to Holmes, "has been in my sights for quite some time." He turned his gaze back to Holmes. "You have pursued the Serpent for years. But did it never occur to you that the Serpent, too, might have been watching you?" A silence heavier than stone settled between them. "Consider this an invitation," Radcliffe continued, his voice soft, measured. "A game, if you will. You have proven yourself quite capable of following the trail. Now, let us see if you are equally capable of leading it." Holmes exhaled slowly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. Too quiet. "You wish to make me your pawn?" Radcliffe's smile widened. "No, Mr. Holmes. I wish to make you my equal." We did not stay long in the hollow cathedral. Radcliffe had not attempted to harm us, nor had he given us any further information. He had merely offered his challenge, and then dismissed us with the same quiet amusement as one might a child who had stumbled too close to something they could not comprehend. Holmes was silent as we walked back through the deserted streets. At last, I could no longer bear it. "Holmes," I said, "what was all of that? What did he mean?" Holmes's face was unreadable. "He has revealed what I suspected," he murmured. "The Serpent is not merely an organization. It is a machine, one that operates not through power alone, but through manipulation, through control." I frowned. "But why does he want you?" Holmes slowed his steps, his hands folding neatly behind his back. "Because, Watson," he said quietly, "a mind like Radcliffe's does not seek to destroy an opponent. It seeks to consume them." He turned to me, and for the first time that night I saw it. A flicker of something unfamiliar in Holmes's gaze. Not fear, not apprehension, intrigue. "He has made his move," Holmes murmured. "Now, I must decide whether I shall make mine." I shuddered at the words, though I knew not why. For the first time in all our years together, I realized Holmes was not merely hunting the Serpent. He had just been invited to become it. Chapter 7. We walked in silence through the fog-laden streets of London, the echoes of Radcliffe's words still clinging to the night like a spectre. Holmes's gait was measured, his gloved hands folded behind his back. But I had known him too long to be deceived. Beneath his careful composure, his mind was racing. It was not the invitation that disturbed me most. It was the lack of outright refusal. Holmes, for all his brilliance, had entertained the thought. He had met a man who played the game as he did, one who had manoeuvred him into this very moment, with the same precision Holmes himself wielded against lesser minds. And he had enjoyed it. I exhaled sharply, tightening my coat against the chill. "Holmes, this cannot be merely another case to you." Holmes's gaze did not waver from the path ahead. "Why should it not?" "Because you are treating Radcliffe as a puzzle to be solved," I said, my voice harsher than I had intended. "But this is not a game of deduction. This is a trap." Holmes stopped abruptly, turning to face me. "Every case is a trap, Watson. Every challenge an invitation. The only difference is whether one is lured into it or steps forward by choice." I bristled. "And what is this, then? A choice?" Holmes's expression did not change, but in the dim gaslight I saw the flicker of something in his gaze, something unreadable. "It is a path," he said at last. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. We returned to 221B Baker Street, though the warmth of our sitting room did little to thaw the unease lingering between us. Holmes lit his pipe settling into his chair with a contemplative air, while I remained by the fireplace, my fingers curling into fists at my sides. "I do not like this," I muttered. Holmes exhaled a plume of smoke. "Nor do I." I frowned. "Then—" "But that is precisely why it must be pursued." I let out an exasperated breath, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Holmes, you cannot seriously be considering—" "The Serpent is not merely an organization, Watson." Holmes's voice was quiet, but there was an intensity to it. "It is a system, a mechanism, a force that moves beneath London like an unseen hand." He leaned forward slightly, the firelight casting sharp shadows across his face. "And Radcliffe, for all his posturing, is not a mere architect of it. He is its reflection." I stiffened. "You mean to say—" Holmes nodded slowly. "Radcliffe sees himself in me, Watson. He recognizes in me the very thing I deny in myself. That is why he has extended this," he gestured vaguely, "invitation." I did not like the direction of this conversation. "And what, pray, do you intend to do?" Holmes's smile was thin. "Why, I intend to accept, of course." I shot to my feet. "Holmes, are you mad?" He remained perfectly calm. "Only a little. This is not another professor to outwit, nor a murderer to unmask. This is a network older than the law itself." I paced, trying to contain my frustration. "If you step into their world, Holmes, there is no guarantee you will walk out of it." Holmes's expression did not change. "Then I must ensure that when I do, the Serpent does not walk with me." I stared at him, my throat tightening. He had already decided Holmes was going to play Radcliffe's game. The following evening, we arrived at Radcliffe's domain. The carriage rattled through the darkened streets until we reached an estate nestled far beyond the public eye. A house not listed in any registry, nor marked on any map. An estate that did not exist. Holmes stepped out first, his posture relaxed, though I could feel the tension humming beneath his skin. I followed, my unease deepening as the doors before us swung open without a knock. Radcliffe was waiting. The drawing-room was luxurious but sterile, its beauty mechanical in nature, a space designed for appearances, not comfort. Radcliffe stood at the centre, his silhouette a perfect cut against the candlelight. "Mr. Holmes," he greeted, his voice smooth as glass. "You are punctual." Holmes inclined his head. "Time is a precious commodity." "I do not squander it," Radcliffe smiled. "Then let us not waste it." A chair was offered. Holmes took it without hesitation. I remained standing. "Your proposition intrigues me," Holmes said plainly. Radcliffe chuckled, as I knew it would. Holmes took a slow breath. "But before I agree to anything, I must understand the rules of this arrangement." Radcliffe's eyes gleamed. "There is but one rule in the Serpent's world, Holmes." He leaned forward, the weight of his words pressing into the air. "We do not change the world. We decide how it moves." A silence stretched between them. Then Holmes smiled. "You mistake me, Radcliffe," he said, his voice like the flick of a knife. "I am not here to move the world." His fingers tapped lightly against the table. "I am here to break it." Radcliffe's expression remained unreadable, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, interest, perhaps even approval. "Then let us begin." As we left Radcliffe's estate, I turned to Holmes, my chest tight with dread. "This is reckless," I muttered. "Radcliffe is no fool. He knows what you are planning." Holmes's eyes remained fixed ahead. "Of course he does. Then what is the plan?" Holmes exhaled softly, his breath visible in the cold night air. "We destroy them from within." I stopped in my tracks. "You mean to infiltrate the Serpent?" Holmes continued, walking. "We cannot dismantle what we do not understand, Watson. The Serpent operates through influence, through control. If I am to undo them, I must first become part of them." I swallowed hard. "And if you do not come back?" Holmes finally turned, his gaze locking with mine. In his eyes I saw something I had never seen before. Not uncertainty, not doubt, something dangerously close to obsession. "Then, my dear Watson," he murmured, "perhaps the world will have gained a better villain than a detective." The words lingered in the air, heavy, immutable. For the first time since meeting Sherlock Holmes, I did not know whether I was watching a man fight the abyss, or step into it. Chapter 8. The night air clung to us like a second skin, as Holmes and I walked in silence through the darkened streets of London. The weight of what had transpired at Radcliffe's estate settled heavily upon my chest, though Holmes, as ever, wore his thoughts like a mask, unreadable, deliberate. It was not the first time I had seen my friend step dangerously close to the abyss, but this was different. This time I feared he meant to step through it. "Holmes," I finally said, breaking the silence, "tell me you do not intend to go through with this madness." His response was infuriatingly calm. "I should think my intentions are quite clear, Watson." I quickened my pace to match his. "Then I must insist, as your friend, that you reconsider." Holmes came to an abrupt halt beneath the glow of a gas lamp, turning to face me. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was quiet, dangerous. "You mistake me, Watson." His gaze bore into mine, sharp as a scalpel. "I do not intend to play Radcliffe's game." The relief that bloomed within me was short-lived. "I intend to win it." The days that followed were uneasy. Holmes did not speak of Radcliffe, nor of the Serpent, yet I knew his mind was consumed by the problem. He spent long hours locked away in his study, scouring through old files, dispatching cryptic telegrams, and disappearing for hours into the underbelly of London's streets. I could do little but watch and wait. Then, on the third night, Holmes finally spoke. "I require your assistance, Watson." I set aside my medical journal, heart quickening at his tone. "With what, precisely?" Holmes retrieved his coat. "We are expected at the Cavendish Club in precisely 42 minutes. I frowned. The Gentlemen's Club? What business could we possibly have there? Holmes's smile was thin. "Why, my dear Watson, an initiation." The Cavendish Club was not merely an establishment for London's elite. It was a fortress of influence, a place where the unseen architects of power gathered, where whispered conversations held more weight than any law passed in Parliament. Holmes strode through its doors as though he belonged, and in truth he did. His reputation preceded him, and I saw more than one gentleman stiffen at his presence. We were led into a private chamber, an opulent, dimly lit room where 5 men sat in silence. At the centre of them sat Radcliffe. Holmes took his seat without invitation. I remained standing. Radcliffe steepled his fingers, regarding Holmes with amusement. Punctual, as always. Holmes inclined his head. Time is the currency of those who understand its value. Radcliffe chuckled, spoken like a man who knows how to wield it. He gestured to the men seated beside him. These are the voices of the Serpent. If you are to walk our path, you must first understand the rules. Holmes smiled. By all means, enlighten me. Radcliffe leaned forward slightly. There is no law. There is no justice. There is only order. A chill ran through me at the simplicity of it. Holmes exhaled slowly. And who decides this order? Radcliffe's smile widened. Why, we do. A silence settled over the room. Then one of the men spoke. There is a task you must complete before we consider your place among us. Holmes's expression did not change. Naturally, the man placed a folded note upon the table. A name. A problem that must be removed. I stiffened. Holmes remained motionless for a long moment. Then, with gloved fingers, he picked up the note and unfolded it. His lips curled into something dangerously close to amusement. He turned the note toward me. My breath caught. The name written was Sherlock Holmes. Radcliffe's voice was a purr in the silence. We must be certain of your resolve. Holmes merely chuckled. An elegant test. Radcliffe's gaze gleamed. Indeed. Holmes leaned back in his chair, tapping the note against his fingertips. And if I refuse? Radcliffe exhaled, lightly, as though indulging a child. Then the decision will be made for you. My pulse thundered. Holmes! He held up a hand, stopping me. Then, to my horror, he smiled. Very well, he said. Consider it done. I stared at him, blood turning to ice. Radcliffe's grin was slow, pleased. Then, Mr. Holmes, welcome to the Serpent. We did not speak until we were safely within the confines of 224B Baker Street. Then I exploded. Have you gone completely mad? You just agreed to your own execution. Holmes removed his coat with deliberate ease, his expression unreadable. Quite the contrary, Watson. I have merely agreed to an inevitability. I clenched my fists. Holmes! He turned to me sharply, his eyes ablaze with something brilliant and dangerous. They believe they have trapped me, he murmured. But what Radcliffe does not yet understand, his lips curled into a slow, sharp smile, is that I have already begun to trap them. Holmes retrieved a single envelope from his desk and held it aloft. A letter will reach Radcliffe by morning, he said. I hesitated. What does it say? Holmes exhaled softly, his gaze unreadable. It says that Sherlock Holmes is dead. A silence stretched between us. Then, at last, I understood. Holmes had not accepted their offer. He had never intended to play their game. He had simply decided to rewrite it. The Serpent had asked for a death, and Holmes, ever the master of deception, had given them exactly what they wanted. But it would not be Holmes who vanished. It would be them. I stared at my friend, the man who had defied empires, unmade masterminds, and danced with shadows. And for the first time I wondered, was he becoming something greater than the detective I had known? Or was he becoming something far, far darker? Holmes met my gaze. his expression unreadable. Then, ever so softly, he spoke. "A serpent cannot strike that which it cannot see, Watson." The words sent a shiver through me. The game had begun, and Holmes had already taken the first move. Chapter 9. For the first time in our long years together, I was watching Sherlock Holmes orchestrate his own death. The morning post arrived precisely at 8. Holmes had been waiting for it. He retrieved the letter from the silver tray without hesitation, breaking the seal with a flick of his fingers. I watched from the breakfast table, my coffee untouched. I had not slept. Holmes scanned the contents of the letter, then smiled, a quiet, knowing curve of the lips that sent a chill through me. He folded the paper carefully and set it aside. "Radcliffe has accepted my death," he murmured. I exhaled sharply, setting my cup down with more force than intended. "Then what, Holmes? Are you to vanish entirely?" Holmes glanced at me, his gaze sharp, searching. "Not entirely," he said. "Not yet." The obituary appeared in the Times the next morning. Sherlock Holmes, noted detective and private consultant, has been reported dead following an unfortunate accident. Details remain scarce, though sources suggest an altercation on the banks of the Thames. Scotland Yard has declined to comment. The city mourns the loss of its greatest mind. The reaction was immediate. Speculation spread like wildfire. The Yard remained silent, though I had overheard Gregson muttering about bloody nonsense as he stormed into his office. Even Mycroft had sent a terse telegram, but the most important reaction came later that evening. A single black envelope slipped beneath our door. Holmes retrieved it without surprise, holding it between his fingers. "Watson," he murmured, "we have received our invitation. We arrived at the designated meeting place well after midnight." Holmes had insisted upon secrecy, which meant I was to arrive alone. I had protested, of course, but he had silenced me with a simple phrase. "A man who is already dead cannot walk into Sauvignon, the lion's den, Watson." "But you can." And so I walked the shadowed path alone. The location was a wine cellar beneath an unassuming public house, far from prying eyes. I was led through a series of dim corridors, my footsteps muffled against the stone floor. Finally, I emerged into a grand chamber, a hidden gathering hall, lined with flickering torches. They were waiting. At the head of the long table sat Victor Radcliffe. His expression was unreadable as he gestured for me to sit. "Dr. Watson," he said smoothly, "you have our condolences." I said nothing. Radcliffe folded his hands. "And yet I do not think you are here merely to grieve." I swallowed. Holmes would not wish for me to retreat into mourning. Radcliffe smiled faintly. "Of course not." The men around the table watched me with cold calculation. There was something about the way they regarded me, as if measuring whether I was a pawn to be used or a piece to be removed from the board. Then Radcliffe spoke again, his tone casual. "You knew him better than anyone, Dr. Watson. And so, I must ask, what would Holmes have done had he lived?" I knew what Radcliffe was asking. Are you still his ally, or are you now ours? I took a slow breath. Holmes was many things, I said, but predictable was never one of them. Radcliffe exhaled softly, considering my words. Then, to my astonishment, he laughed. "Indeed," he murmured, "which is why I must ensure that his death is not in vain." He leaned forward slightly. "We have unfinished business, Dr. Watson. You may be the last man who understands the depth of it." I stiffened. "I do not follow." Radcliffe tilted his head. "You will—" And then he slid a file across the table. I hesitated before reaching for the file, my fingers grazing the thick parchment. Inside, there were photographs. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. The images were grainy, taken from a distance. Then my breath caught. One image stood out. It was Holmes, alive. I felt the blood drain from my face. Radcliffe's voice was calm. "You did not think we would let him disappear so easily, did you?" My heart pounded in my chest. "Where?" Radcliffe held up a hand. "He is where he must be." The men around the table shifted slightly, as though awaiting my reaction. Radcliffe's gaze never wavered. "We have a proposal, Dr. Watson, one that you will accept." I set the file down with deliberate slowness. "And why, pray, would I do that?" Radcliffe smiled. "Because, my dear doctor, the next time you see Sherlock Holmes—" His voice dropped into something like a whisper. "He may no longer be on your side." I did not remember leaving the cellar. The streets of London blurred as I walked, my mind trapped in a storm of doubt. The photographs, the words, the implication. Holmes was alive, but was he still Holmes? I stumbled into 221B Baker Street, heart pounding. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows against the walls. I pressed a hand to my chest, steadying my breath, and then a voice. "Watson." I turned sharply. Holmes stood in the darkness, watching me. For the first time in all the years I had known him, I did not immediately recognize the man before me. He was thinner, his posture more rigid. There was something in his gaze, something I could not name. I swallowed. "You are alive." Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smirk. "Evidently." I exhaled sharply, stepping forward. "Radcliffe, I know." Holmes's voice was quiet. I was there. I felt my breath catch. He stepped into the firelight, his face partially illuminated. "It is done, Watson." I searched his gaze for answers. "What have you done?" Holmes exhaled slowly, as though considering his next words carefully. Then, softly, he said, "I have won." We never spoke of it again. London returned to normal. The papers stopped whispering of conspiracies. The Yard resumed their endless cycle of mediocrity, and the name Radcliffe faded into the abyss. Holmes never explained what had happened during those missing weeks. I never asked, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I would catch him watching the fire, his fingers tapping lightly against his arm. Not impatiently, not anxiously, as though he were waiting. For what, I did not know. But I feared that whatever had happened in the shadows, whatever bargain had been struck, it was not truly over. Holmes had outmanoeuvred them. Holmes had won. But at what cost? I would spend the rest of my days wondering. Had Holmes truly destroyed the Serpent, or had he simply become its new master? Holmes exhaled lightly, staring into the fire. Then, without looking at me, he murmured, "Every game must end, Watson." A beat of silence, then a quiet, knowing smile. But some games never do. The end.